Ed Sullivan stood in the control booth of Studio 50, his face red with fury as he watched the Rolling Stones on the monitor. It was January 15th, 1967, and the British rock band was performing their hit song Let's Spend the Night Together live in front of 60 million Americans. But lead singer Mick Jagger wasn't singing the lyrics Ed had agreed to. During rehearsal that afternoon, Ed had made it crystal clear: change "Let's Spend the Night Together" to "Let's Spend Some Time Together." It was non-negotiable. The original lyrics were too sexually suggestive for family television. Mick had smiled and agreed. But now, live on air, Mick was singing the original lyrics, rolling his hips provocatively, and smirking directly at the camera like he was daring Ed to do something about it. Ed grabbed the microphone to the control room. Cut them off. Cut the sound. Now. What happened in the next 60 seconds would create the biggest scandal in Ed Sullivan Show history and change rock and roll television forever. Before we dive into this incredible story, hit that subscribe button, because what you're about to witness is the moment when the establishment tried to control rock and roll fought back. To understand why Ed Sullivan was so enraged at the Rolling Stones, you need to understand what they represented in 1967 America. The Rolling Stones weren't the Beatles. The Beatles were charming, wore suits, said yes sir and thank you. The Beatles made parents feel safe. The Rolling Stones were the opposite of safe. They were dangerous, rebellious, openly sexual. Their manager had literally marketed them as the band your parents would hate, and it worked. Mick Jagger was 23 years old, with shoulder-length hair, makeup, and a stage presence that was deliberately provocative. He moved like no male performer had ever moved on American television. All hips and lips and sexual energy. Keith Richards looked like he hadn't bathed in weeks, his guitar hanging low, cigarette dangling from his mouth during rehearsals. Brian Jones was androgynous and beautiful in ways that confused and disturbed middle America. These were not nice boys. These were threats to the social order. Ed Sullivan had booked the Rolling Stones reluctantly. His younger producers had convinced him that if he wanted to stay relevant with teenage audiences, he needed to book the bands kids actually wanted to see. The Beatles had appeared on his show in 1964, and the ratings had been astronomical. Maybe the Stones could deliver similar numbers. But from the moment the Rolling Stones arrived at CBS Studio 50 for rehearsal, there was tension. They showed up late, didn't apologize, treated Ed's staff with casual disrespect. During the technical run-through, Mick performed with such overt sexuality that Ed's musical director had to leave the control booth, too uncomfortable to watch. Ed called Mick into his office after rehearsal. "Mr. Jagger, we need to discuss your performance." Mick sprawled in the chair across from Ed's desk, completely at ease. "What about it, love?" Ed bristled at the casual familiarity. "The way you move, the way you perform, it's too suggestive for American television. You need to tone it down significantly." Mick smiled. "That's just how I perform, Mr. Sullivan. It's not an act. It's who I am." "Then perhaps you're not appropriate for this show," Ed said coldly. "And there's another issue. The song Let's Spend the Night Together. The lyrics are sexually explicit. You need to change them to Let's Spend Some Time Together." Mick's smile faded. "You want me to change my lyrics, to censor my own song on your show?" "It's not censorship," Ed said firmly. "It's respecting the standards of family television. 60 million people watch this show, including children. I will not have sexually explicit content broadcast into American living rooms. Change the lyrics or you don't perform. Those are the terms." Mick looked at Ed for a long moment. Then he shrugged. "Fine. We'll change the lyrics for the broadcast." Ed should have known it was too easy. Mick Jagger didn't give in that quickly. But Ed was so relieved to have agreement that he didn't question it further. Sunday, January 15th, 1967, show day. The Rolling Stones arrived at the studio at 6 p.m. for final sound check. Ed watched from the wings as they performed Let's Spend the Night Together with the censored lyrics. Mick sang Let's Spend Some Time Together, exactly as agreed. Ed nodded with satisfaction. Crisis averted. But what Ed didn't see was Mick and Keith huddled in their dressing room, 2 hours before airtime, having a very different conversation. "Are we really going to let this old man tell us what we can and can't sing?" Keith said, lighting a cigarette. Mick stared at himself in the mirror. What do you think happens if we sing the real lyrics? Live. He'll lose his mind, Keith said with a grin. Probably try to cut us off. Could be brilliant television. Could also be the end of us on American TV, Mick said. Who cares? Keith shot back. We're the Rolling Stones. We don't need Ed Sullivan. Ed Sullivan needs us to stay relevant. The kids aren't watching for jugglers and dog acts anymore. They're watching for us. Mick made his decision. Let's do it. Let's sing the real lyrics. Let's show them they can't control us. At 8 p.m., the Ed Sullivan Show went live. Ed did his opening monologue, introduced a comedian, a singer, a variety act, everything running smoothly. Then it was time for the Rolling Stones. Ed walked to his mark, his face already showing distaste for what he was about to introduce. Ladies and gentlemen, the Rolling Stones. The studio audience, packed with teenage girls who'd waited hours for tickets, erupted in screams. The Stones took the stage, Mick in the center, microphone in hand. The opening chords of Let's Spend the Night Together began. Ed watched from the wings, arms crossed. The first verse went fine. Mick sang Let's Spend Some Time Together, as agreed. Ed started to relax, but then came the chorus, and Mick, looking directly into the camera with a defiant smirk, sang loud and clear, Let's spend the night together. Now I need you more than ever. Ed's face went purple. In the control booth, the director looked at Ed through the glass, waiting for instruction. Ed grabbed the microphone. Cut the sound. Cut it now. The director hesitated. Ed, we're live. If we cut the sound, 60 million people will know something went wrong. I don't care, Ed hissed. Cut it. Now. The sound engineer pulled the feed. On television screens across America, viewers suddenly couldn't hear the Rolling Stones. They could see Mick singing, see the band playing, but there was no audio. Just strange, confused silence. In the studio audience, people didn't understand what was happening. The Stones kept performing, kept playing, but the microphones were dead. Teenage girls kept screaming. Mick, realizing what Ed had done, sang even louder, exaggerating every word, making sure the studio audience could hear even if America couldn't. Keith looked back at the control booth and gave Ed a one-finger salute. Brian Jones laughed into his microphone. The whole thing was chaos. After 30 seconds, Ed made another decision. Cut the cameras. Go to commercial. Get them off my stage. The director cut to black. America saw the Rolling Stones for 15 seconds of their performance, heard 10 seconds of it, and then suddenly commercials. CBS switchboards immediately lit up with confused viewers wanting to know what had happened. Ed stormed onto the stage. The Rolling Stones were still playing, still performing for the studio audience even though the broadcast had cut away. Stop, Ed shouted. Stop playing immediately. Mick finished the song, then turned to Ed with that same defiant smirk. Something wrong, Mr. Sullivan. You lied to me, Ed said, voice shaking with rage. You agreed to change the lyrics. You gave me your word. I don't remember giving you my word, Mick said innocently. I remember you demanding I change my lyrics, and me saying fine to get you to shut up. But my word, no, I don't think I gave you that. The studio audience was watching this confrontation, not sure if it was part of the show or real conflict. Ed stepped closer to Mick. You will never appear on this show again. You are banned from CBS. I will personally make sure every network in America knows what you did here tonight. Suits me fine, Mick said coolly. Your show is for old people anyway. The kids don't care about your approval anymore, Ed. The world is changing and you're being left behind. Those words hit Ed like a physical blow, because he knew, in that moment, that Mick was right. The cultural authority Ed had wielded for 2 decades was crumbling. He couldn't control these new artists. They didn't need his permission or his platform. They had their own power now. Ed turned and walked off stage. His producer chased after him. Ed, we need to address this. The phones are going crazy. What do we tell people? Tell them the truth, Ed said bitterly. Tell them the Rolling Stones violated the terms of their agreement and were removed from the broadcast. After the commercial break, Ed returned to camera. His face was composed, but everyone watching could see the anger beneath the surface. "Ladies and gentlemen, due to a violation of broadcast standards, the Rolling Stones performance has been cut short. We apologize for the disruption. Now please welcome our next guest." But the damage was done. The story exploded. By Monday morning, every newspaper in America had the story. Ed Sullivan cuts off Rolling Stones mid-performance. The cultural divide was front-page news. Old America versus Young America. Establishment versus rebellion. Control versus freedom. The Rolling Stones didn't suffer from the controversy. If anything, it made them bigger. Teenage fans saw them as heroes who'd stood up to the old guard. Album sales increased. Concert tickets sold out faster. They became the band that Ed Sullivan couldn't control, and that made them irresistible to young audiences. But Ed Sullivan had lost something that night. He'd lost his position as the gatekeeper of American culture. For decades, an appearance on his show could make or break careers. But the Rolling Stones proved you could defy Ed Sullivan and not just survive but thrive. Other artists saw that and became bolder. The power dynamic shifted. 3 months later, Ed's producers came to him with a request from the Doors. They wanted to appear on the show, but they refused to change any lyrics. Ed, still smarting from the Rolling Stones debacle, said no. The Doors performed on competing shows and became massive stars without Ed Sullivan's help. The same thing happened with Jefferson Airplane, with Jimi Hendrix, with every countercultural act of the late 1960s. They didn't need Ed Sullivan anymore, and Ed, proud and stubborn, refused to adapt. His ratings began to decline. Younger viewers stopped watching. Advertisers started pulling out. In 1971, The Ed Sullivan Show was canceled after 23 years on the air. Ed blamed the Rolling Stones. That night in 1967, when I cut off that performance, I was trying to protect American families from obscenity. But the culture had already changed. I just didn't realize it yet. Years later, in 1981, a journalist asked Mick Jagger about the Ed Sullivan incident. "Do you regret defying him that night?" Mick laughed. "Regret? That was one of the best moments of my career. Ed Sullivan represented everything we were rebelling against. Rules, control, censorship. By singing those lyrics, we were saying that our generation wasn't going to accept their standards anymore. We were free, and we were never going back." The journalist pressed, "But you got banned from his show. Didn't that hurt your career?" "Hurt our career?" Mick shook his head. "Mate, it made our career. After that night, we weren't just a rock band. We were the band that Ed Sullivan couldn't control. That's what made us legendary." If this story moved you, hit that subscribe button and share it with someone who needs to be reminded that sometimes the most important thing you can do is refuse to be controlled. Have you ever stood up to authority when everyone expected you to comply? Share your story in the comments below.